FMPF1 and FMPF3. Does anybody else want to pull anything else at this point? So we need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Mrs. Brill, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. That takes us to new business. Mr. Superintendent, COM 11.
Yes, sir. I recommend the board proclaim February 2019 as Career and Technical Education Month.
Motion made by Mrs. Andrews, seconded by Mrs. Brill. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Superintendent, COM 12.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend the board proclaim February the 14th, 2019 as a day of remembrance for the victims of the incident at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Motion made by Mrs. Brill, seconded by Dr. Robinson. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. FMPF1.
Yes, sir. I recommend the school board receive and accept the monthly contract and disbursement report as submitted.
Motion made by Mrs. Brill, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. Dr. Robinson, did you pull that?
Just my monthly rejection, because we're making progress. I get it, but I think we were 3.4% or something. It's still not good. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Dr. Robinson opposed. Motion carries 6-1. At this point, I'm going to pass the gavel to Vice Chair for FMPF3, and I will return after the board has settled that agenda item. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, sir. Mr. Shaw, I recommend the board approve Amendment 1 to the contract with Rita Salznet and authorize the superintendent and board chair to finalize and sign all necessary documents.
We have a motion by Mrs. Brill, second by Mrs. Whitfield. I pulled this item. I have to vote against this item tonight because when I got the answer to the questions, we have some issues there of not being in compliance with state House of Representative regulations. And, you know, I know there's work that needs to be done, and I do not want to put this board in a position that we are out of compliance with anything that's going on in Tallahassee. And it's something that if we just have to deal with. I'm also concerned about duplication of services, and this may not be the best interest of the board. And to help, I want to be on record that we have somebody who is out of compliance with state requirements by the legislature, and I can't vote for it. Any other questions? Mrs. Brill?
Thank you. I don't know how, I didn't see anything about being out of compliance, but I will tell you that Ms. Solnit, I'm out in the community a lot. I know all of us are, and I got to tell you, this is the first time that we've had boots on the ground, that I hear from our legislative delegation about how helpful she is in drafting bills and working with them. My understanding when I go up to Tallahassee is that we'll be working with Ron LaFace up in Tallahassee, but she's just been an enormous help. I've seen her at meetings. I've seen her in action, and I've been very pleased to have somebody local that's able to assist. So for that reason and others, I'm going to support this item.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a statement that I've been uncomfortable with the way that this contract has escalated. I don't think when we discussed this originally that was my intention, to have the budget go up so much. I realize it's not a huge increase, but I would like to just express that I don't understand why there has been so many more dollars associated with this than I had originally intended. I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And as your legislative liaison, I've been working with Ms. Solnit quite a bit. I've seen her work with parents across America. She actually has a whole lot of experience working at the federal level, going to Washington, D.C., and really working on many projects. She's actually been out to the communities, making presentations, and really truly giving input to the community leaders. She was in the Glades just recently with the legislative delegation, helping to work with West Tech. So I've just seen her do a lot of legwork for us, and I've just seen her work over the years, which has been very, very good. So I'm certainly going to support this.
Any other comments? Dr. Robinson?
If I may, I need clarification on this non-compliance.
The Florida House of Representatives has a requirement that any lobbyist in the state of Florida that has any contact with a member of the House of Representatives has to disclose who those representatives were that they met with. They have to disclose what the topics were that they discussed. They have to list and identify any bills that are being discussed. And this has to be reported on a public records, one of the sites on the Florida House thing. If you look at any of the lobbyists in the state of Florida, they are in compliance. If you look at Ron LaFace's page, there are multiple pages of everything that he deals with. And on ours, there's not one single thing that's been entered in there. And we face being told that she cannot meet with any members of the House unless this has been completed. So I just think it puts the board in jeopardy if this is not being done. Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. Well, I would think that it would be appropriate for staff, to whoever Ms. Solnit reports to discuss that with her and correct it. I'm not willing to, to say that we're not going to continue her work, because I see how valuable it's been, especially in my district where we have a lot of active involved legislators, and I know that she's been offering to draft bills, and she knows the workings of the legislature, and as Ms. Andrews said, both locally as well as up at the federal level.
Mrs. Andrews?
I guess my question would be to Mrs. Schuyler through the chairman. For this report that you're talking about, Mr. Shaw, has anyone spoken to Mrs. Solnit? She's been working with us since, I guess it was August, and being paid with us and doing the work, because she's been out in the field with me as well as working the community. And for something of this magnitude that you're talking about, did anyone speak to her?
Yes. So Mrs. Solnit is a registered lobbyist. She's correctly registered with the Senate and the House. However, as Mr. Shaw states, there is an additional step that is required to speak to a member of the House of Representatives during session. Ms. Solnit's primary scope of work is in the federal area of legislation. So long as she stays within the guidelines of her scope of work, not registering at the House of Representatives and not going to Tallahassee during session will keep her out of a violation. I think it's important that board members remember that her scope of work is really in the federal level, and to handle local relationships and steward those on behalf of the board, while Mr. LaFace's job with Capital City Consulting is to manage the House of Representatives. So as it stands now, Ms. Solnit can speak to any member of the Senate. She would be in violation of House rules if she were to approach a member of the House of Representatives at this time. And she's aware of that.
Right. And just to clarify, the reason this is such a concern, when you look at the questions that I ask, you see that there were multiple contacts made with representatives over the last several months, as well as indications of helping to write bills. And that just concerns me that we're in that position. And a lobbyist working in the state of Florida should know this. So unless there are any other questions.
That has been addressed by staff.
Dr. Robinson?
So the question is, can it be cured? The question is, can it be cured? So I get, as of today, she is out of compliance. The question is, can she now submit the report that goes back and fills in all these blanks that says, I met with whoever on this day, she's got the topics here. Can that be cured? And maybe, I don't know if that's a question for legal.
It can be cured.
Okay.
It's just a matter of filing and documenting. I think the real issue is that it's the scope of service, and it's important that each lobbyist handles the scope of service for their work, particularly during legislative session. This is a slightly new format for the board. However, the format has always been that Capital City manages the delegation during session so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. And then we always had somebody or staff on contract that would take care of the local issues outside of the legislative session calendar. That in and of itself, is if that is honored, we will not have this issue because it would not be critical for Ms. Solnit to be touching House legislators or Senate legislators at this time.
Mrs. Brill.
Thank you, and this is my third comment, but I just wanted to say that I did get assistance in understanding the scope because I wasn't really clear on it, and I did have a conversation with Mr. LaFace as well as Ms. Solnit. I'm going up the day before Palm Beach County Day, because I want the opportunity to speak with some of the authors of some bills that are impacting us while I can get their ear when there's not hordes of Palm Beach County people up there. And Ron's been putting together meetings and organizing them through Ms. Schuyler. So I believe that both lobbyists know their scope, and it did help me. So this will clarify for others what the boundaries are. But as I said, I have found Ms. Solnit's work locally invaluable. It's wonderful to have somebody that is able to work locally. And I also find that Ron's connections, Mr. LaFace's connections in Tallahassee are also invaluable. So we've got the best of both possible worlds. So I hope we can get that cured and move on. Thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield.
Has Ms. Solnit agreed to stay within her scope?
Yeah, I think we're in a good place now. You know, it's also important that the board remember what her scope is. So she also serves at the pleasure of the board, and on occasion she gets requests that are also outside of her scope. And so, you know, it's just important that we stay within those scopes of work. Ms. Solnit can easily file the necessary paperwork for the House of Representatives. That would be the safest thing to do, but during session, it's Capital City Consulting that really leads the charge for our platform.
For the issues that we have previously with the House of Representatives, is there any kind of ramifications that come for not having filed the paperwork prior to speaking with them?
There could be an ethics complaint. Once we realized that Ms. Solnit had not completed the final step of her registration, I suggested that she self-report to Representative Polsky, who is really the member of the House that she had been working with the most frequently. To answer questions, though, not to lobby.
So would that ethics violation have any ramifications on the board?
I honestly don't know.
So I have not, thank you. I have not undertaken the legal research on that, but I can tell you generally, as the board knows, ethics issues are owned by the individual whose ethics it involves. So I would want to confirm this, but I do not believe it has ramifications for the board from a liability or any sanctions against the board. It would be the individual's own ethical violations. But I will definitely look into that and let you know.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and it's nice that we're talking now, but some of the things that we're talking about now, I think those things should have been discussed with Ms. Solnit a while back. I mean, she's been working with me with an appropriations piece with a representative, so hopefully nothing is going to be a problem with that format that has been sent to me, as well as the community that she's actually working with for West Tech and the monies. So, I mean, now I'm hearing all of this tonight about the scope. I'm thinking that conversation should have been held way before tonight, but hopefully there's nothing going to go wrong with the processes that we've been doing to get what we need to get. Can you clarify that for me?
Dr. Fenoy?
So the scope was discussed at the original meeting. So let me be really clear. When we got direction on this, the scope of who was doing what was discussed. It is on record at that retreat that we took. Mm-hmm. So the both lobbyists knew exactly what the scope the board and my office intended for them to have, which is why their contracts were very specific to that scope of work. So from my standpoint, if you're a contractor with us, you should know those rules in order to comply with those pieces. So we were very clear at the beginning when the board and my team had that conversation and we created the contracts. So that's been on record since the very beginning.
Mrs. Andrews?
Just one more time, because I recognize what you're saying right here, but we did some work. Ms. Solnit did some major work on a project with West Tech, so I just want to make sure that that's not in jeopardy now that we're talking tonight about the scope, because when she was doing all of that work, somebody should have known that she was out of her scope before
No, she wasn't out of her scope, Ms. Andrews. So managing the local relationships and advocating on the behalf of the board is just certainly not out of her scope. And she did a great job of submitting the Senate allocation request that is actually in process as we speak.
Good.
So that's not out of her scope. Look, if there has been any misstep here, ultimately that is my responsibility. Legislative affairs is new to me. This is a new structure to the board. And while Ms. Solnit has been a widely broadly recognized community advocate, she's never been a lobbyist before. And so we've worked through the pieces of her contract where we have to have compliance. She is in compliance with the exception of the House, and that can either be corrected with filing a form, but frankly, Capital City Consultant manages the delegation during the session, as it should be. Because we have one touch point in Tallahassee, and that keeps everybody on the same page.
Mrs. Brill?
Ms. Schuyler, to Ms. Schuyler through the superintendent, you've been saying repeatedly when they're in session. So my understanding, though, is that for the prior meetings that she had, that they were not in session.
And it wasn't necessarily lobbying, so responding to a representative's request for information, whether it's on career academies, health education, that wouldn't necessarily be considered lobbying.
So as a follow-up, I believe Ms. Polsky's in my district, and I believe that she actually reached out to Ms. Solnit for assistance.
That's correct.
So, and it was not during session. So there may not be pieces that need to be cured with regard to that, but I mean, we'll leave that up to you and Ms. Solnit
That's
to
correct.
determine.
We'll work through it with Ms. Solnit. And I know that Mr. LaFace will provide some guidance as well.
Any other questions? If not, we'll call the question. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 4-2 with Mrs. Whitfield and myself voting against, and Mr. Barbieri abstained from that vote. So, Mr. Barbieri, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Next item on the agenda is LAC 1, Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I recommend the board approve the 2018-19 negotiated amendment to the July 1, 2017 through June 30, 2020 collective bargaining agreement as attached pending ratification by teachers.
Motion made by Dr. Robinson, Mrs. Andrews, Mrs. Brill, Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. McQuinn, and Mr. Shaw. So I'll second that. Any discussion?
Good man.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0 by unanimous consent of the school board. Congratulations to our teachers. They got a raise they well deserved. P2, Mr. Superintendent, job descriptions.
Yes, sir. P2, I recommend the board approve the job descriptions that were tabled on February the 6th, 2019, with a time certain date of February the 20th, 2019, to come back for approval as submitted.
Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. Discussion, Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off first off talking about I mentioned something to the deputy superintendent and the superintendent that when we do get these job descriptions, and we talked about it last meeting, we do need to get the organization charts. But what became very evident to me when I looked at the organization chart we were presented with, there was a major change, the movement of one of our departments. And I don't have, it's been moved back, so you don't have to look for it, but I don't have these organization charts engraved in my brain. So when there's a change that impacts other departments, I've asked that when we get these organization charts that you please highlight what that change is so that we are aware, and that if there's any concerns, we can express that. Now, I'm not going to make a motion yet to break out the third job description, which is for the professional school behavioral health. I will tell all of you that I've spoken with 4 different professionals in the field, a psychologist, a counselor, and a couple of others, one who's retired. We also received an email from someone who's in my district who's retired in that type of position, which I have here somewhere. But I'll tell you what the concern is, and the concern is on the first 2 qualifications. The qualification of a bachelor's degree in psychology, social work, blah, 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 or 5 years of related industry experience. All of the mental health professionals have said to me that that's not appropriate. And we heard our speaker, who is with the Counselors Association, saying that they all have master's degrees. I was told by the people that spoke to me that you can't have somebody that doesn't have a master's degree in this type of field. And saying 5 years of related industry discipline, well, it was a bit of an exaggeration. They said to me, you know, they could say that they worked at a certain mental health facility, but they could have been emptying bedpans. You don't know what they were actually doing. So I was given some language to change that, but I don't know if you want to have a discussion first about the bachelor's degree or 5-year 5 years of related industry discipline. I know that we need to fill those jobs, but we need to really make sure that we get the right people in those jobs. And if the professionals in those industries are saying that a master's degree is required, I want to know why you think it's not.
Mrs. Brill, perhaps we should have a motion to approve the other 2 job descriptions, and then we'll discuss this one separately.
That would be perfect.
Okay, so you want to modify the motion that's on the floor?
So I'm going to modify the motion on the floor to remove the professional school behavioral health position from the discussion.
All right, do we have a second? Mrs. Andrews seconded that. Any discussion on the amendment? Mrs. Whitfield?
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to jump in before we approve those 2. From my partners over at School Food Service who work on the Wellness Promotion Task Force and oversee that, they had created a little bit of a slight modification to the wording on, I believe, number 6, on all of them. Well, let's see. And I know that stuff that was sent to Mr. Mitchell to add in, possibly. It's a very slight change, and I would think that maybe we should include it. So what it currently says, do you want me to tell you what it says?
No, hold on, Mrs. Whitfield.
It's
So
in all-
we're currently.
It's in all 3 of them.
Yeah,
So
it's on all 3? Okay, so we're currently voting on just removing the 2 from the other one. So let's finish that amendment, and then we'll
We're
go
going to
to.
separate and then we'll talk about all 3 of
Yes.
them separately. Okay. All right, go ahead.
We have 2 and 1. So we're separating the 1 off, and now we're dealing with just the 2. So all in favor of the amendment to separate them? And
Sure.
opposed? Okay, motion carries 7-0. So now, Mrs. Whitfield, we're on, if you're on one of those 2?
So all 3 of them have slight changes to that one. It's all about the wellness promotion policy being added into it. Mr. Mitchell, do you have those bits of change? Did they send it to you? No? So basically, it would say in the job responsibilities, responsible for supporting and promoting the district's wellness promotion policy to include participation in the district's wellness promotion collaboration team from various wellness areas under this position supervision, as well as promoting the district's whole school, whole community, whole child model through the district. And so I think the part that's important to me, slightly different than what's written there, is that instead of just saying that they would work collaboratively with them, it's that they would actually, encourage the participation of their employees, because so many people that will be working under these positions will participate.
Superintendent?
It's too confusing? Okay. Well, you can move on to the next thing if you want, and I'll print this all for you, and you can see it. No?
So what is the ask? I need
The
to hear-
ask is to change it from working collaboratively with all teams and stakeholders to promote the district's wellness promotion policy and include participation on this wellness promotion collaboration team.
Mrs. Whitfield, can you reference that line, which one it is, which position?
Sure.
Thank you.
So on the assistant superintendent position, under performance responsibilities, it's number 6.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, pardon me, performance responsibilities. And then also number 6 on the next one, also under performance responsibilities.
So am I hearing you say you want these jobs to not work with these individuals on the wellness side? You want them to promote them?
Promote the wellness promotion policy. So we have a policy. So
Yeah, I'm
they would-
familiar with the policy.
Yeah, so
Just-
to actually, instead of just showing up to the meetings, be an active participant in them and
Okay.
promote the policy. No,
Yeah, that
too
seems
much.
pretty simple to me.
Just want to add promotes and in front of works collaboratively, promotes and works collaboratively. Will that satisfy you, Mrs. Whitfield?
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so do you want to make, would you like
So
to?
yet another motion.
Yes.
Okay, so in this motion, I would say, so just responsible for supporting and promoting the district's wellness promotion policy. How about I just leave it at that? Can we add that in and that'll be enough? Okay.
Superintendent said he's fine with that. Dr. Robinson?
So,
Let me see if I have a second on that first. That's a motion by Mrs. Whitfield. Is there a second?
Wow.
A second?
I didn't do very well there, huh?
Dr. Robinson, go ahead.
so the reason I couldn't second it is because it feels like mission creep to me. So, I mean, I've been fighting so long for us to get people whose whole job it is to care and focus and look at the eyes of children and address their social, emotional, behavioral needs. I don't want to start broadening it into all the wellness, because we already have like a wellness coordinator or something, right? So there's somebody who owns the wellness policy. I need somebody to own the social, emotional, behavioral part. I think collaboration is great. I get interaction, but I don't want to start having the folks whose job it is to address this start being responsible for the whole thing. That's me.
I'll ask the chair to ask a question.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a point of clarification, if I may. It sounds like when you're saying responsible for the promotion of, it sounds like we're shifting the responsibility for the district wellness policy from school food service to this position. Is that what you're saying?
No, I
Oh, okay.
wasn't trying to do that.
Okay.
No,
I was just
no.
looking for that clarification because it sounded like that a little bit.
No, that wasn't
Okay.
that wasn't my intention. I think
Okay.
more than anything, my intention was that we continued to respect the work that's already been done with the Wellness Policy Task Force and with the group around that. But it's okay. So, I tried.
So you are
I'm
okay with
good.
works
I'm fine.
collaboratively? Okay.
We can leave it.
So we're voting on the director and the assistant superintendent. So is there any more discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Mrs. Brill, now you want to make a motion to change something on the professional.
So before I
behavior
make the motion, I just want to give you a little background, if I may. One of the people that I did have extensive conversations with is Kathy Gunlack. As you all know, she retired. She was a school psychologist here in the district. Also, all of you received an email from Faye Kravitz, and then I spoke to two people that are associated with the Mental Health Association. Faye was a licensed clinical social worker. She worked 30 years as a school social worker and supervisor for Broward County Schools, and she was active in the intervention and recovery efforts at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas after the events that happened. Her email basically says that the position that we have requires the clinical knowledge and training that a master's degree provides. That's what I've been hearing from others as well, that hiring a bachelor's level individual is beyond the scope of practice for this position, and that it would be detrimental to the district to not require a master's level clinician. And I was given some replacement language, but I want to hear what your thoughts are. I want to allow you to explain to me why you feel. I know that very briefly I was told it was because we need to fill those positions. Well, I really don't want to fill those positions with someone who's not qualified to do the work. So,
Mrs. Brill, we have a time certain for non-agenda speakers, and it's now. So we are going to come back to this discussion after we take non-agenda speakers. And at that point, somebody needs to make a motion to put this back in for discussion purposes, because that whole discussion is not
and
part of any
remember my
motion.
thoughts.
Okay. So let's move to non-agenda speakers, and we'll start with, I'll call three names. Would you please come up to the table?